Hello everyone, welcome. I will give you a few seconds for everyone to join. I hope you can hear us and see us clearly. Please give me some thumbs up. You can use the reaction button. Great, thank you. Thank you everyone. Thank you for the reassurance. It's very helpful. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining this webinar offered by the European School Education Platform, the European Commission's platform for school education in Europe. My name is Maria Elena, and I will be the hostess of this session. For those who are not very familiar with our webinars, this is a recorded session. And all the material, including the presentation of our guest speaker today, will be uploaded on the European School Education Platform in the coming days. I can see that my colleague Marta has already shared some very important links through the chat, so feel free to visit them. Before we begin, we would like to remind you of some important technicalities. Following the general data protection regulations, your microphones and your cameras have been disabled, as you can see. However, we invite you to share any thoughts or questions through the chat. We also kindly ask you not to share any personal details or information such as your email during this session. Instead, you can always use the Connect tab on the European School Education Platform for partner finding and collaborations. We would also like to introduce you to a very useful tool, the Captions tool. With this tool, you're able to add subtitles and live captions to this event. To do so, as you can see on your screens, hopefully, right now, you can click the button More at the bar on the top of your screen, and then move to Language and Speech and click Live Captions. Or you can also install this function by clicking again the button More, then click on Settings and turn on the captions in the Accessibility section. Of course, if you have any questions, please let us know in the chat and we will help you as much as possible. So, with no further delays, let's move on. Today, we will be welcoming Marijn Martens. Marijn is a postdoctoral researcher in the field of media and communication, and he's currently working on the project Disconnect to Reconnect. Interesting title, isn't it? So the project objectives is basically to improve people's relationship with digital technologies across work, school, and family contexts. But also Marijn has an extended experience on this topic, and of course the use of smart devices overall in our everyday lives, let's say. Together with Marijn, we will engage in an interactive session where, through an evidence-based look, we will explore an ongoing debate on the smartphone presence in schools. Marijn will present some core topics surrounding this very interesting debate, such as digital well-being, time displacement, distraction, and of course, students' concentration. With no further delays, I would like to welcome Marijn and give him the floor. Marijn, the stage is yours.
All right, I'll share my PowerPoint presentation. Voila, I think everything should be set up. Yeah, all right, great. So welcome everyone, and also from my behalf, a good afternoon. Today we are going to talk about smartphones at school. Title says separating myths from evidence. So that's what I'm trying to do the coming hour, trying to give you some tools to think about this topic. So first, a bit more about myself. As I said, I'm Marijn Martens. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at IMEC MICT UGent. I'm affiliated to the Ghent University and IMEC, which is more like a technology company, and also to the Knowledge Center Data and Society. My topics range a bit. So smartphone and disconnection is definitely one of them. That's what we are going to talk about today. But I'm also focusing on algorithms in our everyday life, contextualizing trusts, mainly in those algorithms or in these technical systems, decoding AI, and what we are here today for is Disconnect to Reconnect, the SBO project that focuses on the impact of smartphones on our society. So the goal of today is not necessarily to promote or to oppose bans. It's really to encourage critical thinking. About smartphone use, I think it's been said already today that it's an ongoing debate. There is quite some opinions that are being positioned there, and I really want to give you the tools to be able to think more critically about the smartphone at school, but also broader in our society, and to give you some empirical basis to separate the myths from evidence, hence the title. And as been said, we are trying to give some interactive features. So if you could all go to the website wooclap.com, which is written here, then you can use this code to log in. That should work. I'm sorry, it's still in Dutch. I couldn't find the setting to change it in English, but it should work. I'll wait a few seconds. I see that people are coming in. And that people are voting as well. So you can vote on the question, do you think a smartphone in general, so not specific in school, is good or rather bad for us? I see we have 86 participants in the group and the call. So maybe I'll wait a few more minutes.
Marijn, we also have some replies in the chat if you want me in the meantime to tell them to you.
Definitely, it's fine.
Yes, we have many people voting for 3 and 2, and one person for 1.
Okay.
Yeah, it's mostly 2, rather good.
All right. I'll see if the consensus is also there with the people voting online. So yeah, so rather good, rather both good and bad and very good. It's interesting that actually, while it's a very ongoing debate, that most of you actually say, almost everyone says that it has definitely good sides to it. All right, great. You can still vote, but that will be just for your own good then. But maybe moving on, how did we arrive here? How did we arrive to this webinar? Why is this a thing to talk about? And that brings me to 2 main ingredients of this debate. First, the device. We have a smartphone, and a smartphone is a jack of all trades. It consists of a plenty of features that you can use, that you can do. It's your maps, it's your music, it's your mail, it's your camera, it's your calculator, and I could go on with this list for, I guess, 10 minutes. You can do anything on that device. And that's actually, quite frankly, one of the first times that is a medium that is possible to do so many things. So we have a smartphone that is capable of doing plenty of things. That's ingredient number 1. A second ingredient is the fact that we see that mental health issues have been steadily rising. We see here on the right that the percentage of people, female and male students, that experience persistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness increased between 2011 and 2021. The same, it has been increasing from the percentage of people considering attempting suicide. So this is quite alarming, and quite a few people have been summing them up. We have a smartphone, we have this increased mental health issues, so maybe one has to do with the other. And people talk, you talk, I talk, We all talk. And it's also in the news. When we look in the news, we see that people are posting, journalists are posting quite a bit of content on the addiction on social media. Social media affects half of the kids negatively, or social media is harming the mental health of teenagers. The state has to act. Your teenagers are addicted to their mobile. 25% are almost constantly online, and so on and so on. It's almost impossible to read the news for 1 month without also getting these types of topics across the board. Also, when you look on the internet, when you see, for example, at the Google search suggestions, you see that we are struggling. We are searching quite a bit of help things to help us into managing screen time with our children. For example, when you search how much time should my child, then we see that spent playing video games, play video games, spend on the iPad, spend on the Xbox. So it's something that is also on the internet. It's also something that is on our minds. If I show you these 4 statements: social media is ruining children's capacity for attention, social media wastes young people's time, social media enforces toxic masculinity, and social media exposes women to unhealthy beauty ideals. I think most of you already thought about this, talked about this, or at least had seen something related to this. Well, it's quite frankly interesting that these are not statements related to social media or smartphones, but these are statements that are found when MTV was hot, when music video clips were evaluated. That people were saying, okay, these music video clips, they are ruining children's capacity for attention, they are wasting time, they are toxic, and they are unhealthy for women because of their beauty ideals that they portray. So it's not something new, but it is on our minds. And also academics, me included, we talk on this. For example, Twenge, quite a big scholar, says that smartphones could have destroyed a generation. So quite a lot of attention, also scholarly attention, is going to the negative effects of smartphones on young people, and they are fueled by academic research. So that's quite alarming that also academic research is focusing on this. Here they say, for example, that more frequent users of digital media goes hand in hand with lower psychological health. And if you compare it, definitely between heavy users and light users. That's an A1 paper for in our jargon. That's very important. So Twenge, it's a scholar who says this. But then we see recently that the research field has also been a bit in a crisis. Replication studies of the study that I showed, they come to very different results. There's quite a bit of criticisms, and you see here go and come back from between different scholars that are actually responding to one another when it comes to this context. So there is no consensus about it. And when you look at the concluding remarks here, they say that the findings contribute to a growing scholarly consensus that time spent on smartphones tells us little about young people's well-being, or that results are consistent with trivial effects detected in large cross-sectional research. For example, they see that the effect of screen time would ultimately be no greater than the effect of eating potatoes or wearing glasses. All these analyses, they do not establish causality, and a small effect size, they would see that it's unlikely to be directly harmful. So the academics, they are also in crisis. They are looking at what is true, what is untrue. And then we could think about why that would be. And if you see at the picture here, you see all these people using their smartphone, and they are all using it for a different thing. The one is scrolling through Instagram to cat videos. The other one is listening to music. The other one is playing a popular game. Another one is still using Instagram. And then the last one is, for example, also just checking if there's something new on their school platform. We could say that our online behavior is very diverse. That one smartphone for one person is not the same as that smartphone for someone else. Everyone has their own way of using the smartphone, and the smartphone means something else for everyone. So what we do on the smartphone depends on the individual, depends on the moment we use it. And the same is true when we look at our population in general. We are also very diverse. Our socio-demographic background is completely different. For people who have less means, they could use their smartphone for way different things than for people who have a lot of means, for example, also to have a laptop or something else. Also, traits like self-control have quite a bit of impact on how we use our smartphone or how that smartphone is used by that individual. So the susceptibility to addictions, etc., could really impact how we should look at this this issue or no issue at all. So when the device is diverse and the individual is diverse, it's not that difficult to see that also the impact of the smartphone will be diverse. This is a visual that is used in a study that shows the individual impact of passive Instagram use, so scrolling through your Instagram feed, and effective well-being. Here you see each block as an individual. That for individuals, for some, it's a positive effect, for some, it's a negative effect, and for some, there is no effect whatsoever. So that makes you think it's quite difficult to think about this. If for some, exactly the same behavior has a positive effect, and for some, exactly the same behavior has a negative effect. That's quite difficult to then have a consensus about, okay, this is the effect of a smartphone, even when we are talking now only about Instagram. So, concluding here, the smartphone is not the big bad wolf. They are not inherently good or bad. And if they are good or bad, might depend on how they are used, who is using them, and when and where they are used. And what I'm telling you right now is actually nothing new. When you compare the smartphone to any media, these same different dependencies of impact, they are there. We as communication scholars often say to each other that media effects are by definition small. The medium doesn't always matter, it only has a small impact. And that's also true in the studies, what we see on the smartphone. It's not the media, it's what you do on the media. So have smartphones really destroyed the generation? Well, we don't know. What we do know is that our relation with technology is quite complex and ambivalent. And to explain that a bit further, I use 3 metaphors to understand. The metaphors are developed by a colleague of me, Marieke van den Abelen, and they are these 3. It's going from a drug to a demon to a donut. So looking at a smartphone as a drug, or as a demon, or as a donut. First, as a drug. When we look at smartphones as a drug, we compare it to other substances, drug substances like alcohol or other drugs, and we see it as an addiction. Our brain is hooked to the constant reminder of things that happens on the smartphone, on notifications of someone liking or feed or whatever. Our brain is hooked on those. These are small dopamines levels that increase because of that interaction, and that becomes a problematic use. A solution that is proposed in this context is to do a long-term detox. But you see the 2 asterisks there. That means that it's not proven. Actually, every time that we tried it, we don't see an effect on it. When you look at the smartphone as a drug, also another issue arises. That's that you consider no smartphone use as the best smartphone use. Comparing it to drugs, no drugs are the best amount of drugs. You don't want alcohol. Alcohol is by definition bad for us. But that's not necessarily true for a smartphone. When you look at the smartphone, it's not the case that you don't want to use your smartphone whatsoever. You want to use the smartphone for what is good for you, and you want to reduce the negative effects of it. So here we actually have a very small part of the bigger issue where people are really into a problematic relationship with their smartphones, that their daily functioning is hampered by that smartphone. And in our research, we see that that percentage is very small. The amount of people that really have issues because of that smartphone to function in their life is quite small. A second metaphor is the smartphone as a demon. And here we see that the smartphone is actually the enemy. It's a problem of social media, of addictive design. The smartphone is meant to try to capitalize on our human weaknesses. It's trying to lure us in. And then we say, okay, we need to reclaim control. So solutions there are taming the technology. For example, imposing some screen time limits when you're using it, that it just says, you should stop using it because you crossed a specific threshold. But also here, there are some interesting problems with that idea, is that the fact that you don't give any agency to the individual. The smartphone is bad and is trying to convince you to use it for a specific way, and you're not considering the individual way of interacting with your smartphone or looking at that smartphone. And also here you see two asterisks, because it's not proven that screen time limits actually improve well-being in this sense. I'm not saying that addictive design is not a thing. I'm not saying that social media platforms are not trying to get as much eyeballs as they can get, but I'm saying that maybe this is also only an issue for some of our people. The third and the last metaphor is the smartphone as a donut, where we actually look at smartphone use as unhealthy habits. I think everyone in this call, and me included, we have some unhealthy habits with food. I, for example, like fries a lot. It's typical for a Flemish guy, but I like it a lot. And maybe I eat it too often. Or maybe if I eat it every Friday, that's too often for me. If you look at our smartphone, maybe you also should just recognize what are the unhealthy habits that we can do about this. What can we do about these unhealthy habits? And here we do recognize the user's agency. Here we see like, okay, you as a user can think about what habits are there and how can we tackle these unhealthy ones. It also contextualizes media use because it's not inherently bad or good, just as food is not inherently bad or good. It's the amount of food, how you eat the food, and how much of the food that you really take in. So here a solution could be a digital diet or situational disconnection. When I'm talking about situational disconnection, that's actually disconnection, the biggest way you can look at it. It's disconnection that is linked to the context. For example, you say, okay, I'm not going to use my smartphone when I'm at the table, when I'm eating, or I'm not going to use the smartphone on the toilet, or when I'm in my bedroom to improve my sleeping. Because those were unhealthy habits. So if you identify those unhealthy habits, it's possible to do something about it. And then we come to the problem. So we looked at the smartphone as three metaphors, and that the smartphone in itself is not the big bad wolf, is not a problem. But we see the second ingredient that I started with, that well-being is something that is affected, or at least is something that is decreasing. And you have a few streams of thought here. For example, one, a group that is considering the fact that we are losing a generation that is anxious and that is lost because of that smartphone. So again, the two graphs in the beginning of the slides, we see that there is a trend upwards when we're looking at persistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness and the considering attempting suicide. So there is a problem. And if it would not be a wicked problem, and I will come to the idea of a wicked problem in a few minutes, then these would be four things that would solve everything. We would just not give the smartphone before high school. We would not allow people at social media before 16. We would incorporate schools as a free phone-free environment, and we would encourage free play and responsibility in the real world. And that's when it's not a wicked problem. But we see that it is. It is a wicked problem. And a wicked problem is a problem with a lot of causes. It's not just one thing that makes young people's mental health decline. And it's been proven. For example, by Valkenburg and colleagues, she found a list of 15 causes to the decline in young people's health, mental health. And when you look down to the list at point 14, there you see the smartphone and social media. But that's just one of all those 14 causes. Another cause is, for example, also just a decline in religion, or the increase in individualism, or a shift to a knowledge economy and wealthy countries. All those things are proven to impact well-being, to impact mental health with young people. So the smartphone in itself is not the main cause or the cause of this decline in mental health. It's a wicked problem that we should tackle as a wicked problem. Another example here is when you look at these suicide rates, the ones that I referred to in the beginning as well, that was data from the US. But here, for example, they want to show, I'll show it here, that around 2008, there is a big uptick in suicide rates in the US. 2008 is also the year where the smartphone and social media was more embedded in our society. you see in the different other countries, France, Japan, Australia, and Germany, that uptick didn't happen. And in those countries, there was not less digitization, there were no less smartphones. So possibly there are some other reasons that suicide rates went increased. So it's not only the smartphone, it's a wicked problem. So when you are listening to me speaking, you might think there are no issues whatsoever. But that's also not true. What do we really know? When we talk about distraction, for example, we know that for most of us, the smartphone distracts. When you look at the 0 point here, you see that most of the people are on the right side of it. So they experience a positive effect. That means they are more distracted when they use their smartphone. So this is really an impact that has been showed, distraction. Something else that we know is that there is a heightened susceptibility. When you look at the different windows of development for young people, for example, at the right, you see a table going from 10 years old to 20 years old. We see that at different life stages, the impact is differently, and that there are some windows where the people are a bit more sensitive to the impact. When you see a line below the black line, it's negative impact. So this has a negative impact on the mental health. The smartphone has negative impact on mental health of these students. So you see, for example, for girls, there are two windows of susceptibility or sensitivity between 10 and 13 and a half, and for between 18 and a half and 19 and a half. And for boys, the first window is a bit later, between 13 and a half and 15 and a half, and again, between 18 and a half and 19 and a half. So I started with people are diverse, but actually not only people are diverse, also each individual is diverse across its life path. There are some moments where they have more impact than on other moments. What we also know is that the smartphone in itself is not bad, as I said, but it can be risky. For example, I read a quote out loud. This is a quote from some of the experts that we interviewed. The answer to everything that goes wrong with digitization is we need to make people more resilient. But this is just ridiculous. That's like saying, hey, that regulation in the car industry, never mind about that. We don't need obligations around braking technology, seat belts, and airbags. People just have to drive very carefully. We don't do that with cars. Yet we do it with media, simply because we don't really know how else to do it. So we know that some behavior with a smartphone is risky, but we don't really know what to do about it. It's not as clear-cut as what this expert was comparing it to the regulation in the car industry. So that brings us to digital harms and digital flourishing. So a question that you then now can ask me is, are smartphones then only bad? But I'll let you decide on that. I think I already know where this is going to go, but maybe we'll see. So here you can describe positive and negative consequences of your smartphone. You can just use short words and then it will show up in a word cloud. Okay. All right, so I see a lot of words appearing, which is great. And a lot of these things are also related to what I'm going to talk about right now. So that's great. I see bullying, I see connection, I see isolation, I see less personal interactions, I see AR applications, I see paying with it, I see a poorer eyesight. So I see a lot of things. Let's dive into this. So are smartphones then only bad? Also, no. And what we consider here are digital harms and digital flourishing. And most of the things that you already talked about in the word cloud are actually possible to put under one of these umbrella terms in terms of digital harms or digital flourishing. For example, when we're talking about digital harms, we have time displacement. And this really means that you are losing times. I think everyone can relate to the fact that you're on your smartphone and at a certain moment, half an hour, 2 hours have passed without you really noticing it. That time displacement is actually a displacement of things that you would want to do and you instead didn't do because you were using your smartphone. Interference is what people were talking about with your lacking concentration, you being disturbed. So that's getting a notification, for example, while studying. When I'm studying and you have your smartphone next to you, you got a notification, you're out of your concentration zone, and look what's happening on your smartphone. But even more than that, if you are doing something on your smartphone and you have a notification, you are stopped with what you were doing and you are interfered in that instance. A third element here is boundary blurring, which is that you are actually, because that smartphone is jack of all trades, you're also putting all contexts here together. You're looking into your work, your friends, your family, and they are all on that one device. For example, if I'm here at work and I get a notification of my wife about my kids, then I can get that now because of my smartphone. But that's actually blurring the boundaries between home and work environment. And that's difficult because I cannot be fully engaged in the one social role that I would have at one time or the other because of that smartphone. And then a lot of you were referring to exposure effects. For example, I saw bullying. That's exposure to interactions, to negative interactions, interactions that you wouldn't like, but also a decrease in eyesight. That's then exposure to features. That's like because you are looking at the screen at an unergonomic way, you can have some back pain, you can have eye strain, or you could sleep less good at night because of the blue light. Another exposure effect then is the one of we have features, interactions, and then content. And that's, for example, that you see something online that you wouldn't have want to see or that has a negative impact on you. As a girl, seeing perfect bodies online has a negative impact on your self-esteem. That's all negatives. That's all those digital harms. But on the right side, you have all the positives. And also you guys already put quite a bit of these in the workload, so you know them. People feel more connected or could feel more connected. They could connect with other people around the world because of their smartphone. For example, with our interviews with some pupils, we noticed that they were considering their smartphone their lifeline to their friends because they didn't feel at home at school. They could connect through the other people that they found important in their life through their smartphone, or also all these online communities. Civil participation is another one where you can actually get information quicker on anything. So it's way easier or way quicker to participate in society. Then you also, I compared it to negative social comparison before when you see perfect pictures of someone, but you can also have positive social comparisons where you can see someone where you feel affiliated with and that has a positive impact. A fourth one is the authentic self-presentation. That's that's one of the flourishing parts that we as adults often don't really see, but it's actually that the platform itself is a great way to self-present on an authentic way that is not always readable for adults, but for them is very important. And then self-control, maybe an odd one because it's the other way of interfering. It's you can control about what you do online. It's when I do stuff online, it's sometimes also easier to control it. When I don't want to contact people, when I don't want to be contacted by others, I can put my phone away. So that self-control is there and is one of the digital flourishing parts there. And if we talk about digital harms, they are definitely not only for kids. This is data from our own studies where we see that when we asked, do you often feel distracted by your laptop or smartphone, that you see that parents, childs, and teachers, those are triads, so that's the parent of the child, the teacher of the child, and the child themselves, they actually feel very similar. In this case, a bit lower than neutral on the fact that they feel often distracted by their smartphone or laptop. So it's not only for kids, everyone is feeling it. Interestingly, when you ask about the child, you see that the child, obviously is the same. But if you ask the parent, they think the child experiences it more, this harm, and the teacher thinks that the child experiences it even more. So this is what we would define as moral panic, where people are actually thinking that their child is experiencing many harms, while in fact they could be experiencing the similar amounts of these harms. It's not only for kids. And when we look at these harms and positive and negative experiences, rather, you can ask yourself, how do they stack up? Because you have positives and negatives, and sometimes you experience one and sometimes you experience the other. Here you have two data sets, 2022 and 2024, from Pew Research, where we see that the positive experiences actually really outbalance the negative experiences. So more people, this is a percentage of the population, more people, boys and girls, experience positive experiences, for example, being connected, or for example, to show their creative side, than the negative experiences, being overwhelmed, the pressure to post, stuff like that. In 2022, this was way more evident than in 2024. So you see that they moved a bit closer together. The negative impact stayed somewhat stable, but the positive ones went a bit down. So less people experience these positive impacts. So there is something shifting there when you look at the census data. Okay, I've been talking a lot about different impacts of smartphones on the context or in life in general in society, but maybe we need to go back to the school. And then we have another question for you. What is your current approach at school? And at school, therefore, I mean the school where you teach, where you are the principal of, where your kids go to school. So the school where you relate the most to. What is the current approach at school when it goes to, I maybe not show the results just yet. All right, let's see. So we have a big proportion of the group where the smartphone is never allowed, the biggest proportion where the smartphone is sometimes allowed, and then some where the smartphone is always allowed. And none of them is ad hoc, which is interesting because we found quite a bit of schools having an ad hoc approach here in Flanders. Okay, so when we have this to consider, maybe we need to think about what we know about the smartphone and education. Here we go. Smartphones in the classroom, and then even if they are in your pocket, might have negative consequences for concentration for some. The might is an important word here. It doesn't mean that it has always a negative consequence, but for some, it does, and that's been proven. So just the smartphone being there could have a negative consequence for concentrations. Another thing that we know is that most students, when we ask them, they are in favor of some kind of regulation. That's not necessarily a ban, but they are in favor of some kind of regulation where they could use their smartphone at one time and not at another time, and maybe get some more information on how to manage their own screen time in the educational context. So this list is quite short. The list that we don't know is a bit longer, and it's all from the same paper from Campbell, which did an analysis of all literature in 2024 and before. And they saw that the relationship between smartphone bans and learning are mixed. So it's not a clear cut. There are some scholars that show that it's a positive relationship to learning, and some that show that it's no relationship whatsoever, and another one that has negative relation to learning. The second one is relationship between smartphone bans use and well-being are inconclusive. So the link between well-being and smartphone ban is also inconclusive, the same as with the learning. The relationship between smartphone bans and reduced cyberbullying is also divided. And that's an interesting one because I saw quite a few of the words in the word cloud relating to cyberbullying. And here we see empirically, it's not necessarily true that cyberbullying will decrease, or at least it's true that cyberbullying will decrease, but not that bullying will decrease when you take the smartphone away. So also there are scholars who are saying there is a decrease in cyberbullying and others that say there is no impact whatsoever. But what about the educational use of the smartphone itself? And that's where it might become interesting. The smartphone might have a positive effect on learner engagement and satisfaction when the smartphone is used in the classroom. So that same device, if you use it in the classroom for educational purposes, might have a positive effect for some on engagement and satisfaction. And then a second element is EdTech in general. So educational technology in general has positive outcomes on learning. It's quite normal to be confused at this moment because I said smartphones has some negative effects, smartphone has some positive effect, and actually in total there is not that much certainty in this context. And then I want to reflect on it a bit. So why is this so difficult? Here is something that you will hear scholars say often: correlation is not causation. This means that when you at a certain moment see that there is a relationship between one and the other, it doesn't mean that that's caused by one. For example, in our case, you need to think about who is using their smartphone more at school or outside of school. If people are not interested in what is happening in their school, maybe they are using their smartphone more. That could be a reason. But if they then have less good results, or if they are less engaged in school, that's not because they are using their smartphone, it's because they are just less interested in school. Also, when you look at the data that we have on schools with smartphone bans, you could think about what schools implement a smartphone ban on their own. Maybe those are schools that have a good structured environment, that have a very high-performing teaching culture, that value performance very highly. And then also that is not maybe the smartphone ban that causes better results, but just the culture in that school, the way they are trying to change that might impact the outcome. And again, referring to we as individuals, we differ quite a bit from each other, and also how we use a smartphone varies per individual. So to conclude, is a ban the answer? Why should we ban a smartphone, and why we should not ban the smartphone and social media? If we say yes, we should ban the smartphone and social media, then we should have convincing evidence and consensus on particular risks and harms, for example, concentration, that are generalizable to the population, for example, concentration, and that we can easily curb by enforcing proportionate restrictions, so that we solve by these bans. These are the things that we should consider when we want to ban a smartphone and social media. When should we not ban smartphones and social media? When the evidence is conflicting and lacks consensus on the risks and harms of which the cause is not properly targeted. If we don't really know if the cause of a specific outcome is a smartphone, we should not do the ban. Also, when a ban is highly symbolic and when it's difficult to curb. For example, when it's difficult for teachers to really check the ban and act on it. And another one is maybe banning a smartphone causes potential harm themselves. For example, if people are using their smartphones to connect with people outside of school because they don't feel connected with their peers at school, banning that smartphone might have harms for those individuals. So it's not clear-cut. We have arguments for a ban, we have arguments against a ban, and we have a lot of uncertainty. That was it for my part. Now it's time for Q&A. The references are at the next slide for future reference. But I'll stop sharing here, and maybe we can see what the questions in the chat are.
Thank you very much, Maureen. I can maybe reshare my slides. So far, we didn't have any questions. Maybe give a few minutes to our participants to maybe address any questions, something that they would like to discuss, even maybe a practice that they follow in their school. But in the meantime, I would like to comment two things. I was reading recently on, of course, on the internet, that the French government is planning to ban the use of social media for young students, for young people under the age of 16. First of all, I'm not sure if there have been any developments on that. I read it a few days ago. I know that our topic today is mostly about the use of smartphones using the classroom and how teachers can either benefit or have find some drawbacks in this. But I think we can dedicate like a couple of minutes in discussing how social media can affect students in the environment of the school. You talked about the bullying, cyberbullying. You talked about well-being, the distraction, maybe.
Yeah, definitely. On the ban in the French government, they are not alone in this. So Australia, for example, I think as well, and the Netherlands, they are moving towards a ban for social media. One of the big issues there is how will you enforce it? And that's what I was trying to say in the end, like how will you make sure that you will be able to enforce such a ban? Because now the age limit is in essence, I think 12, but it's not necessarily the case that none lower than 12-year-old is on social media. And I'm also not saying that that's a bad thing, that people lower than 12-year-olds are on social media, for example, in a context where parents are also going on social media with their kids to see what it is, how you go with it. I think that's part of education, that's part of the upbringing of your kids. But on the element of social media at school, I think that's one of the use cases of how smartphones are being used in a school environment. For example, it could be that social media is actually a parallel universe where people are conversing about the same stuff as school, and then you can have indeed cyberbullying. And there we see, for example, that the amount of people experiencing cyberbullying is quite low, but the impact of cyberbullying is very high. So you would at the beginning think, okay, not that many people experience it, so maybe it's not an issue. But for the people experiencing it, it's a big issue. So that's an important thing to tackle. That being said, banning social media on school premises would not necessarily impact cyberbullying. We see that in our empirical data, that it's not the case that when you ban it at a specific spot, that it wouldn't happen outside of that spot. We can see if you look at school from 9 to 4, after 4, the internet still exists, and before 9 as well. So banning it on specific contexts maybe wouldn't have the same impact as we would expect. And banning it outright also takes away the benefits of social media, where connectedness is still also one of the things that people do there.
So maybe we would need, let's say, a deeper intervention. Maybe, I don't know, a course, a subject. I'm not very familiar with all the curricula out there, but maybe a course on responsible use of digital tools overall. Or I was having on my mind a discussion that we had the other day with a teacher. We were discussing this, okay, and teachers don't have much time because when if they bring the smartphones in the classroom, they need to be aware of the proper use of GDPR apps that are the GDPR compliant apps, that they will respect the data privacy of students, because we're talking about underage people, and also teach students about the permissions, the digital footprint, etc. And we have this let's say complaint coming from the teacher that, yeah, we would love to do this, but we're not allowed. We don't have the time to do this. Our national curricula doesn't allow us, doesn't give us the freedom to do so. So this is also a big discussion, I guess.
Definitely, and on that point, I guess that it's not only the teachers, but also when we are talking about with students, they want to have somewhat of regulation. And for example, the scholarly research is quite clear on a smartphone in the classroom. So, and not on school premises, but in the classroom is not a good idea because it really hampers concentration. It really impacts how kids are studying in that environment. So there it's quite clear cut to not allow it in the class. And then what you said on how teachers themselves could maybe implement some extra curricula, that's interesting, but it's actually something that often already is happening some way or form, at least in the different countries that we checked. And that actually relates also to the quote that I used from the experts, where they say like, okay, if you compare it to the car industry, we also have regulation there to check and to make sure that no big negative consequences, or that we maybe minimize the negative consequences of the cars. Similarly, we could also look at the smartphone. We don't only need to give some tools to the individual, we also need to help the individual in other ways through regulation, through different methods, for example. A third point maybe is also each individual is different. Some people have lower self-control than others. We wrote a chapter on the fact that we maybe think that disconnection shouldn't be only a right, it should be a plight of society to make sure that people who are not able to navigate that digital world, that they are still able to navigate the world without that digital elements. For example, that you don't only that you're not only having access to school through digital means, to say one example.
The equality to access.
Yeah.
Yeah. And since we're talking about policies and banning smartphones in the school, I would like to read some comments that came a few minutes ago. So Annalisa says that in Italy we can't use smartphone at schools, and she's teaching students age 11 to 14. Then Nicola mentioned that the government's ban on the use of smartphone is a violation of the freedom to teach. That's very interesting. The choice should be made by the teacher in the context of the school. Indeed, this could be also a very interesting point here when talking about banning smartphones in schools. And then Anna Maria mentioned that ban enforcement or limited use of smartphones falls down on teachers and parents. If they agree and pass it on their kids, then it can have some positive effects. Then we have here, I think, Guillaume mentioning that one tricky element is a smartphone can also be a tool for experiments, like doing physics experiment, too many sensors and captors. True, indeed.
Yeah.
There are many augmented reality applications that are made to be used in the school environment. And
Yeah, indeed. I didn't start with it, but I'm actually a physics and math teacher by training myself. Indeed, a smartphone is a great tool because it has that many sensors. And that's also what our empirical data suggests. That's EdTech, that's using smartphones as educational technology. So in that case, in most cases, it actually increases the attention of the students in class. So that's really a good implementation of it. So it would be a pity if that could not be done anymore after a ban. That's definitely true. On the other part, when in the beginning it was about it's the responsibility of the parent and the teacher, and I really love the fact that I'm reading it in the chat, but when we are discussing it with teachers, they also often say we need help in this context because it is too much for us to control it everywhere. Actually, we need some kind of overarching, not ban, but legislation in our school to make sure that we use our smartphone, that we can say to the students, you should not use your smartphone in class. But it's definitely true. Also, this we see when you, as a parent or as a teacher, are supporting the adoption of the smartphone and the adoption of social media, where you are saying, okay, we are doing this together, for example, in parental mediation styles, where it's co-using a smartphone, looking stuff together at the smartphone. It helps for people in the end to navigate the digital world more effectively. So that's definitely all true. The thing is a bit, we have some interviews that we are still analyzing, and one of the things is the quote, "Let the school be a school again." And then we need to think about, what is a school? Is a school a space where we should learn how to use a smartphone, or is a school a place where we should learn in a more traditional way, or is a school a place where everything is possible depending on what the teacher thinks is fitting in the curricula? So there are some more higher order questions here, I think, to ask when we are considering all these elements in the discussion.
Thank you very much, Maureen. I think this will give some food for thought to our participants, to everyone who joined today's session. And maybe we could wrap up here if there are no other questions. I would like to make a comment. Maureen, you don't need to reply to this. I would like to give some food for thought to our people watching us. Smartphones can offer many accessibility options as well for students, who have some learning disabilities, some learning difficulties, some let's say students who are struggling with the classroom environment, with their lessons, with everything. So this is also some food for thought on how smartphones could help those students, and of course the teachers who support them. So as we wrap up, I would like to encourage you, to think one small shift that you might make after this session, something that maybe aligns with what we heard today and speaks to your teaching style. Sometimes, the smallest change can make a big difference. So I would like to close this session with a positive quote, let's say with a positive thought. Thank you very much, everyone. And a few seconds before we close, I would like to remind you that you can find more learning events on the European School Education platform. We have an ongoing course. It started on Monday. It's relevant to the topic of gender-based violence online. I think it's also very relevant to today's session. I also have shared with you the link to our online tutorial on the exact same topic. There's use of smartphones in the classroom. And of course, all our past courses that are now offered in a self-paced format. And we hope to see you soon. Our next open webinar will be held in September, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, in September. But in the meantime, you can explore other learning events on the European School Education platform, such as our e-twinning webinars. Thank you very much, and please make sure to fill in the very, very short feedback form we have shared earlier with you in the chat. I will reshare it again. Oh, here Marta has shared it already. Thank you so much, Marta. I wish you a lovely evening. Maureen, thank you very much for this interesting session, this very interesting presentation. The recording and the presentation you have prepared will be uploaded on the European School Education platform in the following days. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice evening, and hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.